Aging is a journey, one that unfolds with both beauty and hardship. In Buddhism, we often speak of impermanence, the truth that nothing stays the same forever. And yet, as we age, we find ourselves surprised by the changes that come, some welcome, others unsettling. The media either romanticizes old age or ignores its struggles, but today we will confront them openly. We will explore 8 common but often unspoken struggles seniors face, habits that can push people away, harm our well-being, or lead to unnecessary suffering. But more importantly, we will discuss how Buddhist wisdom can help transform these challenges into opportunities for deeper peace, connection, and joy. Because aging is not something to fear, it is a privilege. And with the right mindset and spiritual approach, your later years can be the most fulfilling chapter of your life. 1. Living in the past too much. Life is a story, and as we grow older, the earlier chapters seem to play in our minds more frequently. We recall childhood memories, past achievements, and moments that defined us. It is natural, but what happens when we dwell in those memories too much? When we live in the past instead of the present? Imagine sitting in a room filled with old photographs, flipping through the pages of albums long worn with time. The sepia tones of yesteryear hold a certain comfort, a reminder of a life well lived. But as you lose yourself in nostalgia, the world outside continues to turn. The laughter of your grandchildren echoes faintly from the next room, unheard. This is the subtle danger of excessive reminiscence. It detaches us from the now, leaving us stranded in moments that no longer exist. Buddhism teaches us the importance of mindfulness, being fully present in the now. The Buddha once said, "Do not dwell in the past, do not dream of the future, concentrate the mind on the present moment." Clinging to the past, whether it be joyful or painful, creates suffering. Why? Because it prevents us from engaging fully with the reality before us. When we constantly reminisce, we risk disconnecting from the present and the people around us. We become storytellers of a life already lived, rather than participants in the life unfolding before us. Living too much in the past can also hinder personal growth. When we define ourselves only by our past accomplishments, we miss out on the opportunity to evolve, to learn, and to experience new joys. Just as a river never flows backward, life too must move forward. Aging is not merely about looking back, it is about embracing what is yet to come with the same curiosity and openness that defined our younger years. What to do instead? Practice mindful engagement. Instead of solely recounting old stories, ask others about their lives, dreams, and struggles. Listen deeply. Give them the gift of presence. Let their present reality be as fascinating as your past. Cultivate gratitude for this moment. Whether it's the warmth of sunlight on your face, the sound of birds in the morning, or the laughter of a grandchild, find joy in the now. Life's beauty is not just behind us, it is unfolding in front of us every single day. Share stories with a purpose. Use them to inspire or teach rather than simply relive. Frame your memories as wisdom, not as a retreat into the past. A story shared with intention can be a bridge that connects generations rather than a wall that isolates you in nostalgia. Create new experiences, step out of routine, try something new, a different route on your daily walk, a new book, a creative hobby. These fresh experiences help keep your mind engaged and prevent stagnation. Meditate on impermanence. Reflect on the Buddhist principle of anicca, the idea that all things are transient. Cherish the past, but understand that attachment to it only creates suffering. Let it be a gentle breeze that touches your heart, not a chain that binds you. Living in the past may feel like a safe place, a familiar refuge in an ever-changing world, but true peace is found not in retreating to yesterday, but in fully embracing today. The present moment is a gift, one that holds infinite possibilities for joy, connection, and wisdom. Don't let it slip away while looking backward. 2. Resistance to change. Change is inevitable. It often arrives uninvited, unsettling the familiar rhythms of life and challenging our sense of stability. It's understandable why so many resist it. There's comfort in the known, in the way things have always been. But the truth is, nothing stays the same forever. Technology evolves, societal values shift, and even our own bodies transform in ways we never anticipated. This can feel overwhelming, even unfair. But what happens when we fight against change? We suffer. We isolate ourselves from the world, holding on to a version of life that no longer exists. In Buddhism, resistance is one of the great causes of suffering. The more we cling to the past, the harder it becomes to embrace the present. Think about a river. If you try to stand still in its current, you exhaust yourself battling against the flow. But if you allow yourself to move with it, adjusting your stance and adapting to the movement, you stay afloat. Life is much the same. The more we resist, the more exhausted and frustrated we become. But when we accept, when we learn to bend rather than break, we find peace. What to do instead? Embrace the wisdom of anicca, impermanence. Everything changes, and that's not a bad thing. Just as the seasons shift and nature continues its cycle, so must we. Recognizing that change is a natural part of existence helps us meet it with openness instead of fear. Stay curious. Instead of fearing what's new, approach it with a spirit of learning. Try to pick up one new thing each day, whether it's a skill, a piece of knowledge, or a fresh perspective from a younger generation. Curiosity keeps the mind sharp and the heart open. Accept the present as it is, not as we wish it to be. Wishing things would go back to how they were is a sure path to frustration. Instead, shift your focus to making the most of what is. The more we flow with life, the less suffering we create for ourselves. Practice adaptability. Take small steps toward embracing change rather than resisting it outright. Whether it's learning how to use new technology, adapting to a new routine, or exploring a different way of thinking, every little step strengthens our ability to navigate life's ever-changing landscape. Find meaning in the new. Change isn't just about loss, it's also about discovery. Maybe a shift in your life will lead to unexpected opportunities, new friendships, fresh perspectives, or a deeper sense of self-awareness. Instead of focusing on what's gone, look for what's being gained. The world will continue to evolve, whether we embrace it or not. But choosing to accept change, rather than fear it, allows us to live with more peace, joy, and wisdom. Life is still unfolding. Don't let resistance keep you from experiencing it fully. 3. Neglecting personal care. Neglecting personal care isn't just about hygiene. It's about self-respect, confidence, and overall well-being. It's easy to fall into habits of neglect, especially when energy wanes, mobility decreases, or motivation dims. But when small acts of care are overlooked, they can snowball into larger issues, affecting not just physical health, but also mental and emotional wellness. Think about it when you wake up and take the time to wash your face, brush your teeth, and wear fresh clothes. Don't you feel just a little bit more prepared to face the world? On the other hand, when self-care slips away, it often leads to a deeper sense of disengagement, not just from hygiene, but from life itself. This isn't about vanity, it's about dignity. It's about honoring the body that carries us through this life. In Buddhist practice, taking care of the body is an extension of mindfulness. The Buddha taught that our body is a sacred vessel, a temporary home for our spirit. If we neglect it, we disconnect from the awareness that each breath, each action, each simple task is an opportunity to be present and grateful. Bathing, grooming, and nourishing ourselves can be acts of meditation, moments where we connect with our own existence in a profound way. What to do instead? View self-care as an act of mindfulness. Instead of seeing hygiene as a mundane chore, treat it as a sacred practice. Each brushstroke of the comb, each cleansing rinse of the hands can be an opportunity to cultivate presence. Simplify hygiene routines to make them manageable. If mobility or fatigue makes self-care challenging, find ways to adapt. Use a shower chair, set gentle reminders, or break routines into smaller steps that feel less overwhelming. Find joy in small rituals: a warm shower, a soft robe, a light spritz of a familiar fragrance. These simple gestures can uplift the spirit and reconnect you to a sense of normalcy and comfort. Remember that self-care is not vanity, it is honoring life itself. We care for ourselves not to impress others, but because we respect and cherish the gift of life. When we take care of our bodies, we reaffirm our place in the world, reminding ourselves that we are still here, still worthy, still part of the unfolding story of existence. Small habits make a big difference. Self-care is not just about looking good, it's about feeling good, staying engaged, and embracing each day with a sense of dignity and gratitude. 4. Complaining too much. Life is full of challenges, aches and pains, financial worries, family struggles, and the slow realization that we are not as strong as we once were. It's easy to fall into the habit of focusing on everything that's wrong, to air out grievances at every opportunity. Complaining, after all, feels like a release, a way to make sense of what is frustrating or painful. But over time, unchecked negativity becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It drains our own energy, pushes people away, and distances us from joy. Buddhism places great emphasis on speech. The Buddha taught right speech, words that are kind, true, and beneficial. Constantly complaining, even when justified, only reinforces suffering. Negative thoughts, when given voice too often, take root and color every experience with a shade of dissatisfaction. But shifting focus, even slightly, toward gratitude and solutions rather than problems, can transform our entire perspective on life. What to do instead? Practice gratitude. Each day, write down 3 things you are grateful for, no matter how small. A delicious meal, a moment of kindness, a beautiful sunrise. Train your mind to notice and appreciate these simple joys. Shift focus to solutions. Instead of dwelling on what's wrong, ask yourself, what can I do about it? Sometimes, the answer is action. Other times, it's acceptance. Either way, forward movement creates a sense of control and purpose. Speak words that uplift others. Positivity is contagious. When we choose to express encouragement, warmth, and humor instead of complaints, we create a ripple effect of joy. Conversations shift from burdensome to enriching, and relationships grow stronger. Recognize patterns. If you find yourself complaining about the same thing over and over, it may be a sign to change something, whether it's your outlook, your habits, or your approach to a difficult situation. Every person experiences hardship, but the way we speak about our struggles determines how deeply they impact us. When we choose to focus on what is good, what can be done, and how we can support others, we not only bring peace to those around us, but also cultivate it within ourselves. 5. Holding on to material clutter. Over the years, we gather possessions, trinkets, souvenirs, gifts, and memorabilia, each carrying a story, a connection to a moment in time. At first, these things bring comfort, a tangible link to the past, but as they pile up, They can shift from cherished keepsakes to burdens, filling our homes with clutter and our minds with a subconscious weight. Clutter is more than just physical objects. It represents emotional attachment. In Buddhism, non-attachment is a core principle. We cannot take material things with us when we go, so why let them weigh us down now? Holding on too tightly to possessions can tether us to a past we no longer live in, preventing us from fully experiencing the present. Too much clutter can also create stress and even pose safety risks. A house filled with excessive belongings can become difficult to navigate, increasing the risk of falls or injuries. It also contributes to mental clutter, making it harder to find peace in one's own space. What to do instead? Let go with love. Instead of seeing decluttering as loss, view it as an act of generosity. Giving items to those who need them can bring immense joy. The things we no longer use may serve a greater purpose in someone else's life. Keep only what serves a purpose or sparks true joy. Ask yourself, does this item still bring me happiness or fulfillment? If not, it might be time to let it go. Create a space that is light, peaceful, and easy to navigate. A home free from excess clutter allows energy to flow freely, making it a sanctuary rather than a storage unit. Adopt a mindset of simplicity. The less we cling to material things, the more room we create for experiences, relationships, and moments that truly matter. Ultimately, the practice of letting go is not about deprivation, it is about freedom. By releasing the things that no longer serve us, we make space for new experiences, deeper connections, and a clearer, more peaceful mind. Life is not about what we own, but about how we live. Embrace simplicity, and you may find that what remains is exactly what you need. 6. Ignoring health issues. Ignoring health concerns may seem harmless at first. A minor ache, a persistent cough, a dizzy spell, but small issues often grow into bigger problems when left unchecked. Many people push their health aside, thinking it's nothing, or assuming discomfort is just part of aging. But disregarding warning signs can lead to preventable suffering, loss of independence, or even life-threatening conditions. The Buddha compared the body to a fragile clay pot, precious yet requiring care. Like a well-tended garden, our health must be nurtured. Neglecting it only accelerates decline. What to do instead? Prioritize preventive care. Regular checkups, screenings, and early interventions can save lives. Many serious conditions are far more manageable when caught early. Listen to your body. It constantly communicates its needs. Fatigue, pain, or unusual symptoms are not inconveniences to ignore. They are messages requiring attention. Approach aging with wisdom, not denial. Accepting that our bodies change allows us to adapt rather than resist. Taking proactive steps to maintain health is an act of self-respect and self-compassion. Cultivate mindful movement. Whether it's walking, stretching, or yoga, gentle activity maintains mobility, reduces pain, and supports mental well-being. Nourish your body like a temple. Eat foods that sustain energy and well-being. Hydrate, rest. Treat your body with the same reverence you would offer a sacred space. Aging is inevitable, but suffering is not. Health is not just about adding years to life. It's about adding life to years. By listening, responding, and respecting our bodies, we ensure that our later years are filled with vitality and peace. 7. Expecting too much from family. Family is often seen as our greatest source of support, a safety net woven from shared memories, love, and history. As we grow older, it's natural to hope that family will be there, offering comfort, assistance, and companionship. But what happens when these expectations become too heavy? When the love we assume will always be present begins to feel conditional or unreciprocated. It's a painful realization, but one many experience. Placing too much emotional or financial expectation on family members can lead to frustration, resentment, and deep disappointment. Buddhism teaches us the value of metta, or loving kindness, love that is freely given, without attachment or conditions. True love does not demand. It flows like a river, nourishing those it touches, but never forcing its way. When we expect too much from others, we set ourselves up for suffering. The reality is, everyone carries their own burdens, their own struggles, and responsibilities. No matter how much they love us, family members have their own lives to manage, their own challenges to navigate. Instead of clinging to expectations, we must cultivate self-reliance and acceptance. Disappointment arises when reality does not align with our desires, but by shifting our perspective, we can transform our relationships. Instead of seeing family as a source of obligation, we can view them as companions on this journey, people we cherish but do not control. What to do instead? Focus on self-sufficiency where possible. Independence is empowering. Finding ways to take care of our own needs, whether emotionally, financially, or practically, frees us from the weight of expectations and fosters confidence. Build friendships outside of family. Community is essential at any stage of life. Neighbors, friends, social groups, these connections can bring as much warmth and companionship as familial ties. A rich, diverse support system ensures that we are never truly alone. Give love freely, without condition. Love is not a transaction. If we give expecting something in return, we set ourselves up for disappointment. But when love is offered without attachment, it becomes a source of joy rather than frustration. Practice acceptance. Not everyone expresses love in the same way. Some show it through words, others through actions. Understanding this can help ease the sting of unmet expectations and allow us to appreciate the love that is present rather than mourn what is not. At the heart of it all is a simple truth. Love thrives in freedom. When we release our grip on expectations, when we allow relationships to unfold naturally rather than trying to control them, we create space for deeper, more meaningful connections. Aging with grace means embracing what comes rather than lamenting what does not. The love we seek is often already there. We just have to see it with open eyes and an open heart. 8. Becoming too isolated. One of the greatest dangers of aging is isolation. It often begins subtly, turning down an invitation here, skipping a gathering there. Over time, the habit forms, and before we know it, loneliness becomes the default. We tell ourselves we prefer the quiet, that socializing is too exhausting, but deep down we yearn for connection. The human heart is not meant to exist in solitude. Buddhism teaches that community, sangha, is essential for spiritual and emotional well-being. We do not walk this path alone. Just as a candle's flame can light another without diminishing its own glow, our presence, our laughter, our shared moments can illuminate the lives of others. Isolation, on the other hand, dims our spirit, making the world feel colder and less inviting. The irony is that the more we withdraw, the harder it becomes to step back into the world. The phone calls feel awkward. The idea of attending a gathering feels overwhelming. But connection does not have to be grand or exhausting. It can be as simple as sitting in a park, exchanging greetings with a neighbor, or calling an old friend. The smallest efforts can break the cycle of loneliness. What to do instead? Seek out community. Join a local group, a spiritual gathering, a book club, or a hobby class. The bonds we build in these spaces provide warmth and a sense of belonging. Say yes more often. If an invitation comes your way, consider accepting, even if just for a short visit. A few moments of connection can lift the spirit. Check in on others. Loneliness is not exclusive to age. Many people feel disconnected. A simple call, a small visit, or an act of kindness can be a bridge to a stronger relationship. Embrace the present. Instead of dwelling on who no longer visits or who has drifted away, focus on the connections available to you now. New friendships and fresh conversations can happen at any age. Aging does not have to be a journey of solitude. By embracing connection, seeking companionship, and keeping our hearts open, we can ensure that the later years of our lives are filled with warmth, love, and shared laughter. The world is still full of people waiting to meet us. We just have to take the first step toward them. Aging is not the closing of a book, but the beginning of a new chapter, one that can be rich with wisdom, fulfillment, and deep human connection. It is an opportunity to let go of what no longer serves us, to embrace the beauty of impermanence, and to step forward with curiosity and grace. Buddhism teaches us that suffering arises from attachment to our youth, to how things once were, to expectations that may no longer align with reality. But when we release these burdens, we free ourselves to live more fully, more presently. We learn that joy is not something lost with age, but something cultivated with mindfulness, gratitude, and compassion. Our later years can be a time of renewal rather than decline, a time to deepen our relationships, to share our wisdom, to live with authenticity and lightness. It is not about clinging to the past or fearing the future. It is about embracing now. The beauty of life does not diminish with age. It simply shifts, offering us new ways to love, to connect, and to experience the world. So let us walk this path with open hearts, with a spirit of generosity, and with the knowledge that we are never truly alone. Let us find comfort in community, joy in small moments, and peace in knowing that every stage of life holds its own profound gifts. The journey continues, and there is still so much to discover.